Hi, my name is Marcus, and this is a companion podcast for the CG Jung-helpdesk meetup group. I host live events on Zoom every 2 weeks about the concepts and ideas of the Swiss psychologist Carl Gustav Jung. Every event, I give a presentation about the Jungian concept, so have fun with this event's topic. All right, I want to welcome you to today's special event, which is an event that I've basically done before. It's about Logos and Eros, but I had my little problems with it. When I did it back beginning of the year, roughly half a year ago, I prepared for it. I prepared for it a long time. I did the event. The event was amazing because the people that are coming there are amazing, but I wasn't satisfied. I was really not satisfied because I had not the feeling that I could get across what I wanted to get across. Those are really complicated concepts, and I wanted to do it justice. And I had a lot of ideas, and I presented all of those ideas, but it did not make so much sense. It felt a little bit of like structure, and it felt purpose. People still liked it a lot. But I had to say, I did not reach the level that I wanted to reach. So I wanted to use the summer break to invest more time into it and to make it more approachable and more understandable what I tried to get across. Those are two very complicated concepts, and I did a lot of preparation for that. Already roughly a year ago, I did two offline workshops in Berlin. One was on feminine psychology and one was on masculine psychology, and Logos and Eros are very much associated with that. And what was special about those events was that on masculinity event was only with men in attendance, and the on femininity was only with women. And of course, myself sitting in the background, listening, participating. And I learned that really a lot. And this was quite enlightening because I wanted to discuss there those concepts, because I always had a little bit of a bad feeling, let's say, or let's say a feeling for the limits of my own psychology. This is very much what Jung is about. It's about knowing one's limits and the worldview and abilities and capabilities and thoughts and feelings and all these different things. And he says men and women are different psychologically. In certain aspects, even to a very great degree. And this is where he also doubted himself for certain concepts. So he checked that with female patients, with his wife, and other female persons in his life to make sure that he has a concept of the psyche, which is not only based from one standpoint, but rather from multiple standpoints, to have something that is fundamental about the human experience. And I tried to do a little bit like this myself. And as I said, I did this a year ago, and half a year ago, I kind of tried to present it. And I did not reach the level that I wanted to reach. So this is now a redo. I am doing this basically all by myself. The usual location and with the usual preparation. But yeah, this is a little bit of a treat during the summer break. And I want to get into this topic. And this is why this topic on logos and Eros is with the subtitle of an investigation, because I want to take you through my struggles to define it, because it's a little bit vague. It's pretty concrete, but at the same time a little bit vague because it has multifacets. Jung has a lot of concepts that are with multiple definitions. This is something that I talked about recently a lot, about the multiple definitions of the unconscious, the multiple definitions of shadow, and also Logos and Eros has really a lot of different definitions that kind of makes sense when you see them all together. So this is what I'm trying to do here, trying to bring them all together. And I already in the beginning said that this is very closely associated with masculinity and femininity, and in such also then with men and women. meaning not necessarily that masculinity means male and femininity means female, but I will get into that. This is what this event will be about. And I want to start first with something, let's say, very easy, very approachable, which is stereotypes and prejudices that they exist. There's certain sayings that are said about like men and women, the different genders, the different sexes, how they supposedly are in their behavior. For example, men don't talk about their feelings. Women overshare emotions. Men only think about sex. Women can't make up their mind. Men are aggressive when they solve problems. Women blindly follow trends and movements. And men don't have friends. So those are generalities. What I'm not saying is that this is universally true. This is also not what Jung is saying. But if there's one thing we have to always keep in mind when we talk about Jung, is he was always very interested about what people say and do. And he does not start from the standpoint of whether it's true or not, but there's a fact there. And the fact is that people are saying certain things. Kant, for example, the famous German philosopher, said he's not sure whether ghosts exist or not, ghosts like spirits that haunt people, but it is kind of peculiar that people talk about ghosts. So there's something to it. Even though that ghosts might not be real, people still talk about it. Similar with God. There's a discussion whether God is real or not, but what is pretty clear, there is this discussion, and it's in many, many different places. So independent of whether there is a God or not a God, we're talking about God in the discussion whether he's real or not. And similar, Jung approaches a lot of things. He says human beings talk about it, they formalize it, they spend their time and energy on it. So there has to be something there, not necessarily that what explicitly is talked about, but there's something implicitly under it. So this is why it's also worth to look into stereotypes. And those stereotypes are very familiar. These prejudices that we have or might not have against the opposite sex. And what we kind of know, this is colloquial language, we have science studying whether there are differences between men and women and how those look like. And we see there a certain overlap. We see in behavioral studies where scientists record and analyze behavior and patterns, that there are certain things that are associated very much, whether one is of the respective sex. For example, there's a study from 2024 that says men can face distinctive loneliness risks, especially reduced emotional intimacy and difficulties seeking support. Also, another one, women score higher on agreeableness or related interpersonal warmth measures on average. That means compared to men. This is a study from 2010. And another study, women report stronger average interest in people-oriented social and artistic activities. So how do you do a study? How does a sound study look like? You take a huge group of people, you try there to record data, and you try also to get a lot of factors that could play into it. You try to get cultural factors, you try to get age, you try to get income, you try to take, for example, personality, and a lot of other factors where you try to find something that is not determined by this factor, but rather by this one factor, where what the sex of the person is. To then point it down to like, oh yeah, very likely it's associated with that. And very interestingly, we see, for example, for the last point, this women reported stronger than average interest in people-oriented social and artistic activities. We can even break it down to countries. So we have countries in the world that have, let's say, more rights and freedom for women, how they can build their life, how they can pursue their interest. And what we see in those egalitarian societies is that women very, very much gravitate to people-orientated works. That means kind of interests and professions that are, for example, in the caring sector. So, and when you have women, for example, in the technical sector, this is very often in less egalitarian societies because there's very often less economic opportunity. So it seems like there is an interest that's even shown in very young stages and very small children, that there's a greater interest in women and girls towards people and social activities than men, who are more interested in things. Hi, Markus here. If you want to go deeper into this topic, there's a full presentation available as a video recording with diagrams, quotes, and visuals for a deeper understanding. The recording is available as a one-time purchase on Gumroad, yours to keep. All right, back to the topic. Enjoy. And there are multiple studies about that. And this helps a little bit from separating it out from like a stereotype, as prejudice, a thing being said, to, oh, there's a observable, verifiable pattern that can tell us something deep about the people, especially when we put them into an environment where they can really freely choose, where they have the options to pursue multiple paths. Because going back to the factors, when your only job and chance to get money is to become an engineer, a doctor, or an architect, this is then where all people will gravitate towards. But when you have multiple options that all provide a livelihood that creates a life that's worth living, then people can follow their interests. And this is what we can then see in, for example, Scandinavian countries who are very egalitarian in their opportunities that they provide to women. But it goes a little bit further, that you can also go not only what is being said and what behavior is being noticed, it can also go into biology. And a very, very obvious example for men and women is that men produce sperm and cannot get pregnant, and women can get pregnant and carry out a pregnancy. So we have there biologically an asymmetry that is between men and women. This is kind of why it takes a man and a woman to make a new human being, and how many couples in the world work out, a man and a woman. And this goes down to even the cellular level, that we know that medication, for example, needs to be tested separately on men and women. Because it's not enough to only study it only on men and suppose like, yeah, men and women are the same, in the sense of that the effects of the drug will be the same. And we know this, that there's special medication for men and women separately because the biology is working differently. And one really, let's say, great problem that you have is when you do medical studies, you don't do that on pregnant women. You don't do that. Which leads to the situation that when a woman is pregnant, that she should really take no medication because it's not really clear what helps and helps not. Well, there is some, but it's really, really limited because there's not really studies about that. Studies involves large sample groups, and it would be all pregnant women. And if something goes wrong, that would be horrible. It would be a catastrophe on all levels. And we had these cases in the past where there was medication that was really, really not fit for women who carried a child. And one of those examples is Contagan, which was a kind of a sleep help for pregnant women. And it caused huge deformities in the children that were subsequently born. So we have there a biological difference also between men and women. We also see it like in bone density. We see it in upper body strength. There's also multiple studies about that. So why am I talking about that? Because this mirrors a little bit about what Jung talked about. Jung very much thinks in opposites. Like this is when you have certain staples in Jungian psychology, certain ideas that make an idea Jungian, it has to do with opposites. You have light and dark, you have up and down, you have male and female, you have the conscious and the unconscious. So he works very often in this contrast. And we see this contrast also in the world. It does not mean that men and women are fundamentally different, completely biologically, completely socially, completely in their psychology, but they see notable differences. And this is supposed to help a little bit with the understanding of where Jung wants to go with masculinity and femininity. And it will become clearer when we go into the definitions of Jung there. So this is what we will be doing now. We're talking about masculinity and femininity. And for Jung, it's not only that, it's a expression of fundamental cosmic laws. So of course, when we talk about behavior, the question is, okay, is this like naturally born behavior or is it something that's socially conditioned? And very often it's kind of both. It has an influence. Like you need culture to unfold what's biologically there, let's say. And certain things are not biologically determined. Not everything is biologically determined. You have both nurture and nature happening kind of at the same time. And Jung's idea and Jung's stance is that masculinity and femininity are something fundamental, but not only in this human psyche. They're not limited to that. Because we have male and females also in the animal kingdom with other animals. So it's not something that's uniquely human. And he goes even further saying that, oh, it's not only living things. It's like you have it on many, many levels, this kind of interplay of something that human beings describe as masculine and feminine. Because this is what we find in a lot of symbology and a lot of cultural things. That's certain behavior, certain patterns, certain imagery is described as masculine or feminine. And there we always have to be careful. That does not mean male and female. It does not mean males are only masculine, females are only feminine. This I will go into later. But for the moment, it's really we're looking at these terms of masculinity and femininity, and for Jung as a expression of fundamental laws. And he uses there two terms. And the one is logos, and the other one is eros. And logos is a Greek verb, and it means to say, for example, something significant. And it's also that logos is developed with a wide variety of senses, including like description, theory, explanation, reasoning power, principle, and so on. This is a kind of definition from Routledge, which is a dictionary. Similarly, eros, also a Greek word, Jung liked the Greeks, meaning desire. This is, for example, where eroticism comes from as a word. It comes from Eros. And Eros was also the goddess of love. Cupid is the name in English. And it means as much as to desire or to love. And this definition is from Wikipedia. So masculinity, femininity, something speech, something factual, descriptive, and so on. And the other one more interpersonal, desire, love, right? So we will now do an investigation into the quotes of Jung because there's a lot of places where he talks about logos and eros. And where I had a hard time to kind of find the commonalities to say like, oh, this is the one quote that really describes it. So I will go through a couple of quotes so that you at the end come out with a kind of feeling where these multiple definitions converge. So I start with the first quote. What have I to say about logos? The nearest I can get is that it is a certain peculiar quality in a man's being which leads him to discriminate, to reason, to judge, to divide, to understand in a particular way. Man here really we have to understand as a generic masculine, so it applies to all human beings. And one cannot understand all this without also thinking about of its antithesis, the equally intuitive concept of eros, which would be then a principle of relatedness, seeing things together, gathering things together, establishing relations between things. So you already have it. You have this opposite. You have this opposite of eros and logos, to reason, to judge, to divide. This is then logos, dividing, and eros, combining things, bringing things together. And further, eros is interweaving. Logos is differentiating knowledge, clarifying light. Eros is relatedness. Logos is discrimination and detachment. And further, the concept of eros could be expressed in modern terms as psychic interrelatedness, and that of logos as objective interest. And further, by logos I meant discrimination, judgment, insight, and by eros I meant the capacity to relate. You're already noticing there's certain words that keep on repeating. Where logos is ordering and insistence, eros is dissolution and movement. Another quote: eros brings things together, establishes dynamic relations between things, while the relations which logos brings are perhaps analogies or logical conclusions. And another quote: the masculine point of view is the law. Again, masculine, not male. But the point of view of love is, of course, feminine. The one is logos and the other eros. One is law, the other one is love. And this seems very clear and understandable. Like, oh yeah, okay, it's attaching, detaching, isolating, combining. But then you stumble through these quotes, and I read all the books by Jung. So I read a lot of things, and I made a lot of marks and highlighted a lot of stuff. Where you think, I got the concept now, I got the idea. And then he throws in some sentences or side sentences or quotes and paragraphs, and you go like, okay, I did not expect that. Okay, this goes way farther than I anticipated. And this is what these quotes are about. About that, this is not only about, a little bit of abstract things, but every orientating function can function in eros, and everything can function in logos. What does this mean? An orientating function has to do with the typology that Jung built. He says every person has a personality that's personal to that person. And he says there's 4 ways how to sense and process the world, which is thinking, feeling, sensing, and intuition. So what he's now saying is, thinking you can do in an eros way or in a logos way, in a combining way or a separating way, attaching or detaching way. Intuition you can do like that, or sensation, also feeling. So he goes further into that. The functions are vehicles for the forces or influences or activities which emanate from those 2 principles, those 2 gods, logos and eros. And perhaps you can also understand that if there were no principles whatever outside of the functions, one could never hope to detach anything from the unconscious. There must be something which helps one to detach a function, some principle outside which allows one to tear it away from the original lump of unconsciousness. So here we're going already in a applied way of seeing logos and eros, because it's like, I can combine things, I can separate things. But he says, for example, my feeling can be very much attached to the wrong things. Feeling for Jung describes how do I personally relate to something. Do I like something or don't I like something? This is the easiest way to understand it. The world is full with 10 billion things, and you're encountering thousands and thousands of them every day. And most just pass by. There's not really, one does not feel drawn or repelled by them. But then there are certain things that one really likes. And then there are certain things what one really does not like. And Jung says that's not a coincidence. It says something about you. There's something about for you to explore about you being there emotionally involved with certain topics, for example, certain persons, certain activities. And you can totally be wrongly attached to a topic, a person, an activity, like an obsession, addiction, or yeah, being completely engrossed with a person, positively or negatively, where someone has to detach their feeling from that. One is very intertangled with that. So someone has to divide and get a distance between oneself and the thing and one's feeling about it or that person. So we're starting already to see a kind of practical implementation and understanding how things could be viewed in this attaching and detaching way, such as our feeling or even our sensation or intuition or thinking, that we are in our thinking very much attached to a certain thing up to the point where we are very obsessive. Then we have to remove ourselves. This is then also what other people tell us, like, holy shit, can't you stop thinking about that? Are you only thinking about this and that? Or like, why don't you think about that? You should really think about that. You should attach yourself to this with your thought capacities. So going through all those quotes and all those descriptions that Jung has, we can kind of make definitions and we can have these opposites that Jung very much plays with all the time, of logos and eros, of masculinity and femininity, saying, oh, this separating and combining, detaching and attaching, isolating and relating, but also direct action and indirect action, active and reactive, giving and receiving, differentiating and interweaving, static and dynamic, establishing and dissolving. This is already a lot of words how to describe it, right? Logos separating, detaching, isolating, direct action, active, giving, differentiating, static, establishing. Eros, combining, attaching, relating, indirect action, reactive, receiving, interweaving, dynamic, dissolving. So when you would look in the ways how Jung talks about these concepts and these ideas, these would be the terms you would be encountering. And already one gets a kind of feeling or intuition what they mean or how they could be applied. But at the same time, they're still pretty abstract. But there's a very good thing and way how they can become less abstract. Because another big idea of Jung is that people communicate their psyche. People act out their psyche. When human beings create something, for example, art, culture, religion, fairy tales, spirituality, all these cultural achievements, they speak out of the psyche. And in that way, they are formed and shaped by the psyche. And they correspond to the psyche. Popular things would not be popular if they would not speak to us, to our, let's say, individual psyche also. This is how things become popular. They come from a collective place, get expressed, and they talk to a huge amount of people because they're touching in a collective layer. And Jung calls those expressions symbols. And human beings really like symbols and creating symbols. And symbols have a meaning. They mean something. And he says they're not necessarily constructed through conscious effort by logical conclusion and all these different things, but rather they come from a deep down creative part of the psyche, where they kind of emerge and we try to understand them in hindsight. There's a huge discussion what something means. And what I want to get into now is really how to read symbols, because it's something that human beings don't do so much anymore. we kind of, let's say, lost this access to our unconscious and how our psyche operates. So Jung sees in the psyche different layers, and those different layers operate differently. Our conscious works different than our unconscious. And he sees there a kind of archaic layer on our psyche, how human beings are when they, for example, get born as children, but also how they were in the past, where the psyche and consciousness was not so strongly formed through culture, education, rules, and all these different things. But human beings were more just living in the forest or in the desert in small tribes. So tribal, archaic psychology, where he says it's still like present in us, but we are not really connected to it so much. We try to connect to it through culture, dancing, going to the movies, reading something, music, and so on. It touches something. And when people create something, they write a story, they draw pictures, it is then also from that place where, in this psychology, where then the results are coming from, when they're not disturbed by the individual psyche. So to understand symbols, we have to put ourselves mentally in the shoes of human beings, how we lived thousands of years ago or 10,000s of years ago, where we looked at the world very, very differently. And how our psyche by default more looks to. Right now, our consciousness and our psyche is very much optimized, let's say. It's formed, trained like a muscle. And this is a very, let's say, rational muscle with rules, mechanistic, to function in a very rule-based and mechanistic society. So we have to put ourselves back and understand that like symbols in this deep part in our psyche has very much to do with experience and how we initially experience things. And what something is made of, for example, is secondary. And we very often start with, oh, how does something work? What does it consist of? This is a very scientific view, which is an incredible achievement that human beings were able to do that and were able to spread this knowledge. It's incredibly powerful to be able to think scientifically, because it means we can live longer, we can live healthier, we can travel the world, we can do all those things. We can live in highly, highly complex societies and have a lot of things that we otherwise would not have. Because when you look at the Middle Ages and earlier, there were a lot of things that did not exist, like penicillin, which are actually pretty good and that we would not want to miss and we would not have if we would not be able to think in that scientific way. But Jung says that's not the only way how the psyche works. We also have a symbolic layer, and it comes out in art, and it also comes out during dreams. And this is why dreams are very hard to read, especially when you try to take them literally and not symbolically. And to interpret a symbol means how the experience is for us initially. We have to become very, very naive. We have to become very, very embodied. We have to picture us in a situation. We have to remove us from abstract concepts. And for example, what we experience of water, right? What is water? The immediate experience, the bodily experience that we have there is wet, refreshing, or slippery. But another way to look at water is to say, oh, it's H2O. So you have 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom, and then you have water. You even have more in there. You have minerals and you have bacteria and all these different things. But we only know this because somebody basically told it to us, because of science, because of research and so on. But we don't really see that when we experience it. We don't see the atoms. We don't see the viruses in there. We have our experience: wet, slippery, refreshing, life-giving, or even life-taking when we're drowning. So a lot of our symbology and how we talk about water and how it's represented in art or in our dreams is very much associated with that. For example, the unconscious is represented by water. Why? Because you can't look too deep into water. Things suddenly appear. Things can completely disappear, nowhere to be found. It's a kind of barrier that's hard to traverse. That is also kind of dangerous, but also there can be very useful things. Like a fish suddenly can come out of nowhere, like a thought, like a feeling, like an idea can appear out of nowhere. This is why we have water very, very much associated with the unconscious part of the psyche. And this has to do with how we experience water. I see the water surface. I can't see very far below it, but things come up and I can go down there and I have no idea how deep it is. I don't know what there is. There could be a whole world there. So it's already filling imagination. And similarly, how people, for example, seen the earth in the past was, of course, we see it from our point of view, from our perspective. We see, oh, the sun is rising and the sun is setting, and the moon is moving, and the planets and the stars and all these different things. And scientifically, of course, this isn't right. The sun is not setting, the sun is not rising, the earth is rotating. But we don't feel this rotation. We don't see it. For us, everything seems normal and everything's stable, and it moves then around us. And we say, oh, this is the center. So this is where the world was really Earth-centered, the universe, with the Earth in the center and everything else moving around it, like the sun and the planet and the stars and so on. Of course, now we say, oh, this is not true. Scientifically, that's not true. Like, we are moving around the sun, the earth is rotating. This is why the sun is setting. This is why we have seasons and all these different effects that we have there. And we can explain it, like, how does it work? What is it made of? And all these different things. But still, when you want to do something romantic, you're going to see the sunset. You're going to see the sun rise. You're not standing there and thinking, oh, the earth is just rotating. You're having a feeling that something is happening there in your psyche that speaks to you. And we have then these stories and this mythology of that the sun is kind of escaping this great dragon and fights its way free. But in the evening, it sinks down, it disappears, and who knows whether it will come back. And it has won the fight against darkness, and then it rises again. Which is like a typical myth that the sun is traveling through the sky. And one does not diminish the other. The scientific not necessarily takes something away from the symbolic, and the other way around. Like, both of them are true. One is like materially true. It's true that the earth is rotating and it's rotating around the sun, and that the earth is round and all these different things. But our experience is different. We don't experience it as such. We have to abstract ourselves out of that to, kind of then believe it. So when you have the people saying, oh, the earth is flat, they're kind of right in the sense of, when I look at the world, it all looks very flat. I don't see that the earth is round. Like, of course, logically and scientifically, everything points to that the earth is round and not flat. But my experience of the world is pretty flat. And most of the cases, most of the time. So we have to go with understanding things symbolically with our experience of it. And then very much it is connected to meaning and not facts. Like, science tried to get away from subjectivity and like meaning and all these different things. It's, in the sense that not so much of an ethic in there, in the sense this all needs to be removed to have something very, very factual. And this is how we get a lot of things, and a lot of stuff works because of that, because it's not only influenced by one's individual psyche, but there's like rules and laws that function like this all the time. And this can be for physical matter, but also for societies and how human beings behave and all these different things. But at the same time, we are individual people. We have a subjective experience. We have this also need for meaning, this need to understand and connect it. And we find a lot of meaning in these symbolic representations. This is why people find meaning in religion or in a story or in a song or in spirituality, or even philosophies are very often associated with strong symbolism, that it speaks to people, right? These lower parts. And so when you want to interpret a symbol, really try to picture you in this situation. How would it immediately feel? Not from a factual knowledge thing, but rather from an experience and thinking about what it means. So now I talked a lot about how to read a symbol, but it's very hard. It really takes a lot of practice. But it's then kind of cool because something a little bit unlocks. I want to help you to also unlock even more. So when we talk about the symbols of the feminine and the masculine, how it's represented in art and culture, you also have again this opposites and these different examples for logos, masculinity, and eros, femininity. And it then connects them to these different ideas. So, for example, in symbology, when you look in tarot, for example, the intellect, the mind, very much associated with the sword. Cups is associated with the relations. And going by the definitions from Jung and what we learned already, this helps us to understand it, because what does a sword do? It cuts, it divides. But at the same time, it does it elegantly. You don't have an axe. An axe is very brutal. It can only chop. But with a sword, you can pierce, or you can cut, or you can just slightly touch something. And there's myths where the world has been cut out of a great beast, and the blood of the beast is the oceans, and the ribs of the beast are the mountains, and all these different things. It's a cutting, it's a separating, and this is what a lot of, let's say, thinking is also about, to separate the wheat from the chaff, and what about this? What about this? Oh, this is not this. All these different things, and a symbol of the cup. Why does a cup associated with interweaving and attaching and gathering together? Because a cup can hold things. Like any vase, cup, and so on, bowl, can take many different things and bring them together and hold them together. Right? It's not separating them out, it's having them all together in one place. And then it goes further, you have judgment and you have mercy as concepts. Judgment meaning, you're being after an argumentation and a conclusion, and you're being sentenced away in isolation in a prison. And you're being singled out, there's a specific behavior of you that's characteristic of you, and this is why you should not be with other people. And mercy is you are forgiven. You're seeing in a broader context. It's not only this one thing that's characteristic of you, and you're allowed to be with others. So you're already noticing that these come up. You have this idea of seed and body, idea and form, that something comes up, and it might be a small thing, like a word or idea, but this can create something. Companies are started like that. Books are written like this. They start with a small idea that comes in and then it takes form and has something physical, right? So similar as man can't do anything physical out of their own bodies, the women then can take that seed, the sperm, but make a body, make another human being out of it. They give it form. And this is then what Eros is like. It's this gathering of different things. So the form, the idea, the structure, how it's supposed to be, has come from the one side, and the expression that actually then coming is from that. Similar with a plant. Plant grows in the ground. The ground is like all the same. But depending on the seed that you have and that you put inside, another plant comes out of the same ground, right? Like kind of all the plants are already in the ground, but it takes a seed to give a kind of the building instructions to make then this specific plant. So it is then that logos is something very abstract, but the feminine, the eros, is very concrete. And if you spin this further, this is why you have in Christianity, which is a very spiritual religion, you have the Holy Spirit without a body. It's symbolized by a dove, which can fly up in the air, far away from the ground. And what does the church as a spiritual endeavor does not like? Oh, it's a bodily. It's a lust. It's the bodily sins. It's the even then the feminine. Like this is also very much expelled in a lot of religions because it's then they're, let's say, a bit. I want to be careful here. Not necessarily messy, but it speaks psychologically to kind of the other side. So this is why what is left out of the Trinity is then also part of reality, the devil, the earthly, or also the feminine, then missing these representation. Not saying that the feminine is a devil, but it's put in this like the same corner as being excluded from all the logo spiritual up in the sky abstract things. And now a lot of more symbols make sense. For example, bright and dark. So light is very concrete. It tells you what it is. You can put a spot on something, you can single it out. But in dark, everything becomes kind of one. A dark room, you have no idea what's in there. It all comes together. It's all mushy. Same as us, our consciousness is then dark and mushy, and we don't really see what's in there and what can come up and can come out of it. But we can go into our conscious to bring something back with like a concrete idea. And you have then kind of also on the opposite, you have maybe order with the logos, like you have judgment, you have things are clear and structured and they relate to each other in a certain way, and that's very fine and neat. But on the other side, you have chaos. This is then from the point of order. Like everything that's not order is chaos. Like, oh my God, there's no order in there. But at the same time, when you have something that's completely ordered, at the same time, it's sterile. Nothing changes, nothing moves, is static. What you need is a dynamism. You need change, you need new stuff. So where does new stuff come from? It comes from unusual places. New companies start with weird ideas from like weird people that nobody believes in. But they see there's something and come out of that. It's not the biggest companies that have the best ideas, basically. They had the ideas in the past when they started, when they were growing, but now they're large, static, unmoving, unchanging. Changing a huge structure is close to impossible. And so it becomes sterile, and people are then they're very discouraged. They say like, oh my God, nothing moves, nothing changes. We are not adapted to what's happening around us. We have to be more dynamic. We have to adjust to this what could be interpreted as chaos, but at the same time, it's fertile. This is change. This is where new stuff comes from. And this is also a very painful process to change. But this is then coming from this, let's say, Eros side. You start to include things that were not included before because the structure became stiff and like bad. So for growth, you need to change, and the change has to come from the unusual places. So you can't be too strict. You can't be too judgmental. You also have to have mercy. You have to pay attention to the things that are not paid attention to. And we have it very often in stories that the hero is a complete outcast. Like Harry Potter, he's an orphan. He's living under the stairs. He is quite, well, one could say poor. He's a kind of underdog. They do have a lot of stories at the underdog, but the underdog saves the day. This is a representation of this principle. Somebody from the outside, the foreigner, the stranger, comes and revigorates a sterile structure. Neo also, the Matrix is completely stiff, unchanging, but he comes and changes it and frees humanity. And you have a lot of stories like that. And so you have this dry and wet, like dry, static, nothing changes. There's, let's say, too much light. And then it's good when things are dry, because then you don't have bacteria, you don't have things disintegrating, but at the same time, things die. You need wet, you need things changing. And symbolically, when you start combining this and getting these definitions and looking out, a lot of more things make sense, like sun and moon. Like those are gendered in most languages. And the sun is in most languages masculine and the moon is feminine. And now with this concept of logos and eros, you can kind of see it. So the sun is active, it sends out sun rays. And the moon would not shine, would it not collect the light from the sun and reflect it. And the night then again is like very dark. Everything is coming together. This is where strange things are happening at night, where it's dangerous to be outside because you don't know what's happening. People don't feel safe at night. At day, it's another thing because you can see like far. This is where the normal things happen. But at night, the weird and strange things are happening. But also the interesting things are happening at night. This is why people then go out on dates at night, because new things are being created. They go to concerts or theater plays. It would be weird to do that at 10 o'clock in the morning. People would just intuitively not go because it does not fit. Oh yeah, I want to kind of open myself up to these chaotic things, to the fruitful things that come up through me in my psyche. I want to experience those. I want to be open to change. In contrast to I'm very focused at day and I have my tasks and my structures and my time and all these different things. It's more loose. People drink and take drugs in the evening and in the night. This is what human beings are acting out, this kind of principles. And this is what Jung tried to get at. That is not very much like, men are like this, women are like this, but rather, human beings are like this in general, that they're acting out both. And you have this is in a lot of symbology worldwide, and one is that of Tao. This circle that's half black, half white, with two dots, with a black dot and the white dot and the black. And the name is yin and yang, and yin means the wet, dark side of the mountain. And yang means it's the bright, dry side of the mountain. Fitting all those definitions, fitting that, you have this interplay. You have dry, wet, you have dark, light. So this is what the symbolic representations of Eros and Logos are, and how they express in different levels in art, but also then in human behavior. And this interplay is very important because you don't only have one and the other. You kind of need both. And Jung has here an example to describe the interplay. One sees it even in the case of the contraction of the muscles. It is the basic fact of the so-called antagonistic innervation. For instance, to extend your arm seems like a simple motion characterized by oneness of purpose. But that is by no means true, because in the same movement by which you extend your arm, you also innervate your flexor muscles. Or if you bend your arm, you feel at the same time your biceps getting contracted on account of the antagonistic principle. This principle of antagonistic innervation is valid throughout the whole of our nature. The structure of the body is built upon it, and the idea of pairs of opposites is simply another formulation of that fact. We have these both things, logos and eros, represented as masculinity and femininity, as wet, dry, light, dark, order, chaos, sterile, fertile, and so on. And I heard a beautiful example already some time ago that I want to give you that makes it even clearer. And it has to do with the holidays. What are the holidays? The holidays is a special time where the family gathers at one place. People coming from all over the world sometimes, traveling all over the world to be home with the family at the holidays. And there, a very integral part of the holidays is food and eating way too much. So you prepare food. What do? You go out into the world, into the supermarket, and the farmer's market, and the store, all these different places to gather food of different sorts with an idea in mind what you want to cook for your family that gathers for the holidays. And you start preparing the meal. So what do? You peel the tomatoes, you remove something from them, you cut up the meat, you separate those things, you separate the things that you don't want to keep the things that you want. And then you put it all together to cook it in a pot, for example. But you have several pots for different parts of the meal. And then the meal is ready, you sit down and you all eat the same food together. And the food will become part, so you chew it up again in small parts. And it becomes part of your body. So all the people that are gathered there, their bodies are made of the part that they're consuming. So that everybody's consuming the same thing. So everybody is kind of becoming the same until the holidays are over and people are spreading out again into the world, taking this shared experience with them and the food and the body that's being built out of that food. Until the next time when there's a holiday and someone and all of them are getting back together. This is what I mean with the interplay. It's a kind of circle. It's a kind of turning of coming together and separating, coming together and separating, coming together and separating, which creates a kind of circle and flow. And it's completely natural when it happens like one after the other. You have to do one thing and the other. You're kind of oscillating between those opposites. If it would be only one thing, it would not be a holiday meal, right? If it would only be isolating in the sense of I'm gonna celebrate alone and I'm just gonna eat the food how it is from the store, right? And or I will invite like, I don't know, random people from the street that I don't know. That would be a huge sign of a kind of mercy again and hospitality. But I just put everything in the pot that I kind of find in my refrigerator without a clear plan what I want to do. And not everybody eats together, but like everybody eats in separate places. And it's a kind of, it suddenly doesn't work anymore, right? It has to then to be this specific things. It has to be done at specific points where you come together and then you celebrate. And this is then this interplay that we act then out on multiple levels. And you are not really aware of that and conscious of that because it's very intuitive, meaning it coming from the deep parts of the psyche, which is then fun to point it out because you're like, oh, I understand. Now I see it. The coming together, the separating, the light and the dark, the dry and the wet, the sterile and fertile, and so on. So we have this interplay, and there's something that needs to be really, really clear because it's easier to get it wrong. Men are not only logos, and women are not only eros. All human beings have always both. And this is what Jung says really on many, many, many occasions. It's just that he says men are a little bit more on the logos side. So they tend more to like logos behavior, masculine behavior. So dividing, separating, judgmental, law, ordering, structuring, and so on. And women are a little bit more on the eros side. Connecting, combining, bringing together, merciful, all these different things. Compassionate, we could also call it. And he says, yeah, it could be something like 51% to 49%. It's just like a little bit, but it is similar as human beings are introverted or extroverted, that you can be kind of both, but you feel more at home at one place. Oh, yeah, I'm more introverted or I'm extroverted. I'm more of a thinking person or more of a feeling person. you have two hands, you should really use both and not say, yeah, well, this is my favorite hand. This is all I need. So it is that men are more on the Logos side for Jung and women are more on the Eros side, which does not mean that this is how it should be and always will be, because this is Jungian psychology. Jungian psychology is about personal development and change. And where does change come from? Always from the dark side, always from the side which is unfamiliar to us. So if I, as a man, want to progress in my psychology and become a whole human being, the chances that I need to evolve my Eros side are very, very high. My feminine side. Similar for a woman. It's then the weaker side, the Logos side. It's really helpful to think about it in the case of hands. You have two hands, you have one that you like way more than the other, and you use it for everything, but you also have the other hand. And for Jung, psychological development means to approach the other hand with more care, with more attention, because you get better at the things that you do and pay attention to. And he says, pay attention to the other side, which is more easily said than done. Because he's saying, for man, the feminine side, the Eros side, very likely is underdeveloped. Same as when you're an introvert, the extroverted side is underdeveloped. And for women, then the masculine side is underdeveloped. So how does this underdevelopment express itself? Jung calls it very often inferior, which does not mean bad, which does not mean worthless. It just means not as strong as the other side. So this is why I call it here, let's say, underdevelopment. It's just underdeveloped. It could develop, but at the current stage where it is, it's not everything that it could be. That's a good way to see it. So this inferior side, this underdeveloped side, is underdeveloped because our experience of it, for us, of it is not positive. It's overwhelming. It's difficult. And Jung describes it. This is again gathered from a lot of quotes where he says this inferior side expresses itself in its experience as very childlike, very simple, and hard to control when active. So something overcomes a person. So, for example, he says, when you're not a thinking person, thoughts can be a horrible experience because you don't understand where they're coming from. You don't know what to do with them. You're unsophisticated in your ways with thoughts. At the same time, with feelings, you get the sudden feeling, it overtakes you. You don't know what to do with it. You don't know how to deal with it. So it seems very autonomous. We don't have it under our control. And it's then very obsessive that it overtakes our mind and our thinking and doing. And it's like overwhelming, overrides us, like an emotion that floods us and then we act out, for example, anger or lust or even extreme joy, which can be detrimental to us, but we cannot really then control it in the situation because we have not learned yet how to control it. And it feels then very often incredibly raw, incredibly intense, like an open wound. So this is why people avoid it, right? Like an introverted person does not want to be very much extroverted. And the worst thing you can do to an extrovert is to put them alone in a room and spend time with themselves. So this is what these people will naturally avoid. Similar as it would be completely natural for a man to avoid his femininity and for a woman to avoid her masculinity. So it is not consciously available. It pops up like a wild animal or like a storm. And it does what it does and then it disappears. And it feels then very, very random. And you cannot dictate it. You cannot steer it. You cannot really change it, especially in the beginning because you're not used to that again. And it feels then very dirty and shameful because you don't have it under control. And it gives a very bad feeling. It is a bad feeling to know that you're not the master of your own house, that you're not in control. And what Jung said, and this is very interesting, that they see it somewhere outside in the world. This idea of projection, that the things you don't see in yourself, you see outside because you don't connect it to you. So when you say like, oh, everywhere I go, it smells like dog poop. How the wisdom goes, you should look under your own shoe. It's a kind of projection, like everywhere it smells really bad. Everywhere I go, it's horrible. It's then the question, okay, it's you perceiving it. What does it say about you that you're perceiving the world like that? And this is why I chose here the picture of the devil and the tarot, because the devil has chained a man and a woman and basically dictates their life there. He's overtowering them. They are not free. They cannot go anywhere. They are dependent on him, and he carries them around. So this is always incredibly negatively connotated in culture. When something takes you over, it possesses you, it rides you like a devil. And Jung says, yeah, that's very likely from the other side, from your shadow side, from where you're not looking, from the thing that you are avoiding because it feels dangerous and it's very hurtful to deal with it. So how does an underdeveloped logos and eros express itself? He says, an unconscious eros always expresses itself as will to power. So to overpower people. This would be then a problem of man, that they very much with their unconscious, inferior, undeveloped eros rather try to overpower people, to like say bring things together in a forceful way, which is not good. So also how these things are perceived. Disorder is destructive. So eros. This is then the perception of it. Order is always a cage. So for the eros side, from the eros perception, the logos would be very much a cage. It should be more open. There should be more inside. Why is it so exclusive? Why are not more things included? And in logos, in principle, there's nothing personal, and in the deepest sense, impersonal. So just because men and women have the favorite hand, it doesn't mean that this hand is also fully developed in everything that it could be. It could also in certain parts be unconscious, so that makes everything complicated. Just because you're a man doesn't mean you're a master of masculinity. And just because you're a woman, born a woman, doesn't mean you're the master of femininity. This kind of also needs to develop. And Jung has another quote here: love is a feeling, yet the principle of eros is not necessarily loving, it can be hating too. You're still then intertwined, you're still involved, interweaved with the thing. When you hate it, you're then very much attached to it, you're chained to it. And you have a picture of, let's say, the dark side of femininity. A lot of femininity representations, when you look in the Greek pantheon, for example, is very positive. You have love with Aphrodite, you have with Demeter, you have fertility, you have things growing. But there's also a dark side to it. In Indian philosophy, there is Kali, the goddess, which is very frightful and that kind of rips things apart, but also consumes them, because combining them in her stomach, she's giving birth to a child, but then eating it at the same time. So it kind of does not escape. So it's then a kind of entrapment. So it's a horrifying picture. The pictures are horrifying. But for Jung, this is also a side of femininity. There's a positive side to masculinity and a negative side to masculinity. There's a positive side to femininity and a negative side to femininity. So you have a duality there. It's not really about, oh, one side is good and the other is bad. No, both things have positive aspect and negative aspects. They have their own duality, their own opposite within each themselves. So specifically then to men and women and the underdevelopment there, he says, eros without logos inside never understands. There is nothing but blind relatedness. Such people can be related to God knows what, like certain women who are dissolved completely in little happy families, cousins, relations. And there's nothing in the whole damn thing. It's all perfectly empty. I did a movie analysis about this phenomenon. It was Runaway Bride. The story of Runaway Bride is that Julia Roberts completely dissolves in her relationship. Suddenly takes on all the hobbies, interests, characteristics, and even food preferences of her partner. She's not her own thing. She's completely 100% adapted. But that's only one side of her. And this is then why she runs away from the wedding, because that would be the final union. This is, you're becoming one couple, you're becoming one thing. And there's something inside her that's saying, no, you would completely use yourself. So it's her logos side that's saving her in the situation, that separates her out of the relationship, because she's not really ready to go into a relationship, because she cannot do both. She can only do one side, and she needs to learn to become her own woman, have her own thoughts, her own ideas, her own business, to then purposefully, with intent, actively go to Richard Gere and propose to him. So not to be on the receiving side, on the side that's being asked, but be on the asking side, on the active side, more on the masculine side. Again, symbolically, not all men active and all women are passive. That's really not what it means. And another quote then, this time about men. Men are rarely split off from sexuality because it is too evident for them, but what they lack is eros, the relational function. Men often think they can replace the relational function with reason. They are proud that they don't let themselves be controlled by affect, because that would be womanly, tantamount to weak. No eros, for God's sake. This lack is what women most complain in marriage, and is what so disappoints them. And Jung says that there's a fundamental misunderstanding in men, that they're looking for sex, they're looking for connection, but it's then again, for inferior side, undeveloped side, a bodily connection that's trying to be made, while there should be a connection in the mind being made. And this is then what's like more important for women normally. This really mind relationship, to have a relationship on all levels, and not this singular thing about bodily sex. And this is what men really need to learn if you want to have good, successful relationships with women. You need to develop your feminine side. And this is what a lot of stories are about, and a lot of movies, where you have the strong masculine man that has to learn his feminine, weak side through taking care of a child. There's countless, endless amount of stories like that. And people want to see it again and again and again, because it represents something fundamentally, and it touches something very deep within our psyche. So this is then how it looks like, how people try to deal with their, let's say, one-sided situation, where they need the other side to progress and to evolve and to live a happy and fulfilled life and live out their whole psychology, not only part of it. This is very much what Jung is about. And this is then also something that is tying into very big terms that Jung talked about, which is anima and animus, because logos and eros are the foundations of anima and animus. Anima and animus are personal representations of those principles. But this is very important to get logos and eros right, to move then to anima and animus. And I promise I will do an event about anima and animus. But first I had to lay all this groundwork, and this was laid today. And I want to summarize what was discussed today. So, masculinity and femininity isn't just male and female, and the other way around also. Men and women act out these cosmic principles of attaching and detaching. Acting out only one side is highly, highly pathological. If you would only live your life on one side, it would be horrifying. You could not live a complete life. So it means balancing both, developing both, creates a meaningful life and meaningful relationships. And this cosmic laws, these functions, these ways of how things are working is expressed deeply in human culture and in traditions. So I have here, to summarize everything, a quote from Jung from the Red Book. So the Red Book was where he wrote down his dreams and his day visions and tried to make sense of it. But he brings it all together. He says, If you go to thinking, take your heart with you. If you go to love, take your head with you. Love is empty without thinking, thinking hollow without love. The serpent lurks behind the pure principle. And this is what this whole event was about. And I want to thank you very much for your time and attention. And if you found that today interesting and you want to delve deeper into certain topics, I want to recommend to you other events than I did. For example, the last event on the inferior function, that's episode 60 in the podcast. This deals more with this inferior side, which is then very interesting, how it expresses itself and how it is experienced. I had an event on symbols. That's episode 14. It's called Symbols and the Third. So this is pretty obvious what it's about. It's really more about symbols, where they're coming from, how they can be approached, what they mean, and all these different things. And then there's an event that I would also recommend. It's episode 57, Dancing and Movement. And this is really an acting out of symbolic behavior, and how like dancing and circular motion and movement and all these different things are again expressions of the psyche, and they point to something fundamental in the psyche. This is what is very typical about Jung. It's not only abstract, it's not only theory, it's very, very much connected to behavior and how things are and how people act. And this is why it feels very, very much alive to talk about Jungian ideas. And yeah, I would like to thank you for your time, for your attention. And I hope you learned something. And I hope, my investigation became clear. This was really not easy. This was a lot of work. But I hope you liked it. I hope you learned something and could take there something for your own life and your own understanding. So, thank you. This was this event's topic. Thanks for tuning in. If you liked today's presentation, consider joining others in supporting the help desk with a donation on buymeacoffee.com. And if this episode meant something to you, share it with a friend. I help others to find this podcast more easily by rating it in the podcast app of your choice. And of course, you are more than welcome to join the live discussions after the presentation part during the events. The links are in the description. See you next time.